Hit record here and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. We're really excited about this webinar today on advancing sustainability through hyperlocal action with Clayton Ferrara. I'm your host, Don Hall, co-director of Transition US. And this event is part of our monthly webinar series. Before we get started, I'd like to just make a few quick announcements. First off, this webinar is sponsored by Transition US, which is the national hub for the International Transition Towns movement that's actively building resilience from the bottom up in thousands of communities in 50 countries around the world. You can learn more about us, find a transition initiative near you, sign up for our e-newsletter, and donate to support programs like this one at our website, which is www.transitionus.org. I also want to tell you about one other upcoming event that we have taking place on Wednesday, May 8th. This is a special event for us. We're going to be doing a webinar with David Holmgren, co-originator of the permaculture movement, live from Australia. That will take place at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, May 8th. He'll be talking about his latest book called Retro Suburbia, how we can retrofit suburbia to be a truly sustainable way of living. So that should be a great one, and you can find more information about that and register on our website, which again is transitionus.org. Finally, just going to explain a few things about our webinar format and platform here. This webinar will run for approximately 90 minutes, beginning with some introductory remarks from our presenter, followed by Q&A. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the Transition US YouTube channel starting later today or maybe early tomorrow. We are also streaming via Facebook Live. So for all of those who are out there in Facebook land, you can also submit your questions that way by typing in a comment on the live stream. For those who are here, you can use the Q&A module that you'll see in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Just type into that and add your questions as they come up. And I'll be feeding them to Clayton during the Q&A period. You can also, under participants, in your toolbar, click on that, and there should be a button at the bottom to raise your hand if you want to ask Clayton a question live on the air. I think that's about all I had, so I want to turn it over to Clayton Ferrara of Ideas for Us, and thank you very much for being with us here today.
Well, thank you, Don. I really appreciate it. Can everybody hear me okay?
They can't respond unless it's unmuted since it's a Zoom webinar, but they can type into the chat. Brittany says yes.
Perfect. The best kind of thing. So, hi, everyone. It's a real honor to be here today. I want to just start by thanking you, Don, for welcoming me and for all of the work that you're doing with Transition Us. So thank you very much for that. Like I said, it's really a wonderful thing to be able to reach many of you with all of this different type of information that I'm going to share today. So my name is Clayton Ferrara. I'm the Executive Director of Ideas for Us, and I'm a biologist. I've spent the last 20 years of my life involved with conservation issues, really looking at everything from our unfortunate biodiversity loss that we're facing, very much so centered around animals in Florida, where I grew up. And for those of you that know about Florida, we have had practically everything that can possibly go wrong in the lens of the environment go here. So it creates a fantastic learning environment of what to do and what not to do when it comes to the environment. So now, to fast forward to the last 8 years of my life, I've had the wonderful privilege of being part of an organization called Ideas for Us. And I'd like to start off today just by talking a little bit about why grassroots action at the hyperlocal level is so important. After I'm done speaking a little bit about that, I'm going to jump into what Ideas for Us is and how we're addressing that problem. After that, I'm going to talk about 5 topics that I want you to be aware of in your planning of hyperlocal action that can really help you. And then I'm going to go into a few slides right before our Q&A. So while I'm talking, if there are comments and things and questions that pop up, please jot those down. I don't want to lose any of that information, because that's usually a sign that there are others as well that are thinking these things. So let's start off. Why is hyperlocal action so important? Well, the answer is a bit difficult to discern. For starters, we live in a global community where so many of us are bombarded each day with bad news about the environment. One of the things that I've certainly realized in growing up first in public school and watching documentaries on TV and reading National Geographic magazines and kind of being part of the general public receiving scientific information is that there's no shortage of bad news. And what winds up happening is that people become apathetic, and they start to really get cemented into their minds the aspect of, what can I do as one person when these many problems that are so vast globally are confronting us? And I think that this is definitely something that's plagued the environmental movement really since its second resurgence in the United States in the 1960s and 1970s. Remember, environmentalism is something that goes deep back into the American ideal. Really around the turn of the last century, not 1999, but 1899, you see the loomings of serious conservation. Of course, the first Sierra Club meeting and the infamous meeting of Teddy Roosevelt and John Muir that led to the formation of our national parks. At that time, with the American expansion west, you had biodiversity levels extremely low, bison almost going extinct, advent of things like steam engine and the Industrial Revolution causing our ability to change the landscape greater than we ever have before. But it's really in the 1960s and 1970s, I'd say maybe 1962, with Rachel Carson's Silent Spring becoming published and becoming a bestseller, all the way through to the very first Earth Day, right, which of course we just celebrated here recently. The environmental movement in the United States has been around for a while. But what's missing in environmental advocacy, I think, is the message of environmental action. And as far as Ideas for Us goes, we do not see ourselves as an environmental advocacy organization. We see ourselves as an environmental action organization. And that's really important because the action that everyday people are able to take happens at the hyperlocal level. Certainly we need champions speaking about these things on the global stage, but unless we have a mass movement of people focusing in on their particular communities, where they live, where they work, where they've grown up, and organizing in those particular areas, that's very, very important. So, of course, that's the aspect of localism. Just to define a couple of things real quickly, the aspect of hyperlocal means that you're focusing in on a geographic area, right, that is within your sphere of influence. So this could mean you're all the way out to your community. It could mean your business or place of work. It could mean your city block that you happen to live on. It could mean your own backyard. But these are very personal spaces often. Of course, sustainability truly starts with the individual making a decision to live within the confines of the environment and to not use single-use plastic, overtly and to do all of the types of personal decisions that I think individuals can make an impact. But the hyperlocal aspect is taking that outside of yourself and into your immediate surroundings. So very, very important. Again, a major reason of why this is so important is because it provides a fantastic learning ground for you to be able to understand how different kinds of solutions can be developed, how action projects can be created, and then how can they be scaled to have a greater impact, maybe in another community that you communicate in, and also to bring other people to the table, like friends, family, colleagues, fellow students, and coworkers. So that's a very, very important aspect. Of course, I think that all of us also know that, just from the mental health aspects of so many problems that we're facing in the environment, it is very important for us to have those small wins and to celebrate them. And I'm happy to say that in the last few years, there have been many conferences popping up around the world that focus on solutions more so than what the problems are. Those of you that are interested in conservation like I am, I invite you to check out something called the Conservation Optimism Conference, which is coming up in September of this year in Oxford. So important things to consider. So what is Ideas for Us? What do we exactly do, and how are we helping to fit into an important piece of this hyperlocal puzzle? Well, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so we are essentially a business that exists for a purpose other than profit. We're led by a mission, and our mission is to develop ideas, fund action, and scale solutions to the world's most pressing environmental and humanitarian challenges. So what this means is that we exist in communities and on campuses that we operate in. We've been around for about 11 years now and have done work in over 30 different countries around the world, many, many, many communities within those places and many campuses within those places as well. And in that network, we bring together your general public, elected officials, business owners, students, their professors, into a collaborative environment where we're able to provide some key education about how global challenges in sustainability manifest themselves at the hyperlocal level. So for instance, let's take a look at food insecurity, right? Many people know that food insecurity is a problem all around the world, but do they know exactly what food insecurity issues are playing out in their local community? Well, to do this, we of course respect the localism aspect of that community and empower people in those communities to do the organizing, do the education, construct the projects that we then fund, and carry out the particular action that's occurring there. Even in times where we've traveled to other countries, myself and my team were there largely in an educational capacity to be able to teach people about how to empower themselves and to carry out this work in the community. So that's a very, very important part. One thing that led to the creation of Ideas for Us was while we were forming this as college students ourselves back 11 years ago, we were pretty shocked that each college has a similar set of problems that they're facing around sustainability. Whether it's too much single-use plastic in the food services, maybe they don't recycle, maybe there's no off-campus recycling or very inefficient energy, lights and HVAC systems. Maybe they're building yet another parking garage instead of exploring a bike share program or zero carbon travel. And with so many similar problems, we were amazed that there was not a network in existence where people were sharing solutions and best practices to help fast forward this impact. So this was a major problem, and we started to mobilize first as students, connecting to groups of other students, and we utilized a very strong value set to do this. One of our major values is mutualism. And that whenever we were asked to come in to a new campus and to organize people or in a community, if there were other existing environmental organizations or other environmental nonprofits there, whether it was one specific to the school or a national program like Sierra Club or Audubon or something like that, we would not compete with them. we would basically say, look, we're Ideas for Us. We want to partner with you. We want to give you access to some of our resources. We want to share our approaches and our different kinds of metrics and key performance indicators with you. We want to be able to just create change and outcome and impact ultimately on campuses. And what that did was it helped us to scale very rapidly and to also learn best practices from our partners. So to this day, Ideas for Us still serves as an entity that works to develop, fund, and scale these different solutions around the world. So let's jump into some aspects of how to properly plan hyperlocal action. And again, I see someone posted here asking what hyperlocal is. I think I defined it before, but you can think of hyperlocal as the space that exists between you as yourself and your community at large. So you can define the parameters of your community however you like. Some people have a very small community. Others have a very large community in which they operate. Usually, it includes your place that you live, your immediate friends and family in that community, could be your city block, could be your campus, your dorm building, or even your city itself. Beyond your own city, you're getting out of the sphere of hyperlocal, then you're doing community organizing and things like that. So again, tackling those kinds of things, very important. We want you to try to take on environmental action across multiple communities, but it's important to kind of cut your teeth and learn the different types of skills and negotiation methodology in that hyperlocal setting first. So very important. First part of hyperlocal organizing that I'd like to bring up is the determination of where you're going to do these types of actions. So that means place. Whether you are a college student organizing on your college campus, or you are a community member, a young professional, a business owner, an elected official, whatever it may be, you have to decide what is the geographic area that you're trying to make an impact. This could be as small as your front lawn, or as large as your whole campus, again, in that hyperlocal kind of mentality. And this is so important because there's many different organizing methods that go into thinking about these places. One of them, for instance, just as a quick example, is if you are a student at a community college, one of the things that we've realized is when you're trying to hold meetings, either before or after class or in the evenings, very often meetings held on campus at a community college are very poorly attended. And the reason is because most community colleges are commuter schools, and everybody, when they're done with class, is itching to get off of that campus. And it's got to be a really good reason to keep them on campus. And unfortunately, a club meeting or something like that isn't always the best. So if you're organizing at your community college, what we recommend is that you think of your place that you're trying to hold the meeting and the action project as being outside of the campus, and that a cafe, a bar, whatever it may be, community center, a closed church in the evening, these types of off-campus places centrally located near campus are often far more attended. So the determination of the place of both your meeting to organize and to carry out the action project is very important. So first thing you want to do is think about where this is going to happen. The second thing that you want to think about is your participants. This is a really important aspect. I always say that the most important participants to have in the room are the people that you're trying to help. And this is very important. It seems like it's common sense, but you would be surprised how rare that actually is in this type of organizing. Especially, and certainly not to throw shade on my fellow academics, but often in academia, the population that you're trying to help is sometimes brought in last. And so much work and intellectual thought and time has been spent formulating a project or approach that it really is unfortunate that they're brought in so late in the game. So you've got to think about who the players are. Let's look at a college campus, for instance. I get the idea that many of you are many of you are college students or young professionals. And if you're trying to do work on a college campus, of course, you're looking at the student body. But just putting out a blast across all email lists usually isn't very fruitful. People are often desensitized to email blasts these days, to say the least. We all get hundreds of emails a day, probably. I know I do. So the solution to this is to think of your environmental meeting as something that, rightfully so, everyone on campus should have some kind of interaction with. So what we recommend is that you go to student records or student government, you get a list of all of the clubs that are officially recognized on campus, and you see who the elected president of that club is or the contact person of that club, and send them a letter. Send them a letter. We've seen this done both ways, either physically, where someone actually gets a physical letter in the mail or put into their school mailbox, or through email. And both can be very effective. Of course, I think an official letter these days or something physical holds a lot more importance, and they'll see it as something that's much more important. But you send them a letter basically saying, we're so-and-so club on campus, we want to organize for action, and we would like one representative of your club to come to our particular meeting that we're hosting on campus, and we essentially want you to have a representative appear and keep you in the loop with the types of work that we're doing. And what this will do is then at your meetings, you'll have representatives from Greek life, from sports teams, from varying majors, from clubs that have particular focuses on recreational activities and whatnot, coming together and looking at those types of things. If you're a community organizer and you're already doing this type of work, it's important to not leave out some very key players in the civic sphere. So of course, remember, we've got three areas in our civic sphere. The first is the public sphere of government. The second is the private sphere of business. And the third is the independent sphere of essentially independent organizations like churches, institutions and universities, and other nonprofits. And these are really the movers and shakers of the community. Often there's some overlap, but not always. They're not always necessarily communicating with one another. So using your organizing meetings, public input projects, or a call for volunteers to target those different groups can be really important. But you certainly always want to have the people that are benefiting or who are victimized in a particular situation that you're trying to address to be involved in those kinds of projects. And I would say, secondly to that, the people who have access to the resources or the answers to questions that you may have in finding a particular solution. So let me give you a quick example before we move on to the next aspect. We created a program called Fleet Farming, which I'll share a little bit more of in just a moment with some of the slides. But Fleet Farming is a urban agricultural program that is geared around using bicycles as a way of moving volunteers through the community to focus on organic farming and the conversion of lawns into productive organic farms. And one of the cool things about that is this program was essentially created through crowdsourcing of ideas in the community at one of our hyperlocal educational sessions. So we looked at the right problem, I believe, of the fact that 1/3 of climate emissions comes from the industrial agricultural system, and also your average plate of food travels 1,500 miles to get from wherever it's being grown to your plate. Well, both of these compound to the terrible ratio of one caloric calorie being equal to 10 energy calories having to be expended to create that. So we're operating at a serious loss here. And I think that urban agriculture, permaculture, and these types of things are all familiar to you all. So in the fleet farming model, we knew that the people that we needed to have in the room and the subject matter experts that we wanted to organize were both the people who would be doing the volunteer work, the elected officials that are making decisions about zoning and ordinance and whether or not food can be grown in front, back, or side lawns, and also members of the community that are looking to have these gardens right in their community, or are looking to have the benefits of the produce that's being harvested, which in many cases is businesses and the government officials of the city that are maybe running a farmer's market or things like that. Again, having those right people in the room, tremendously important. Third thing I'd like to say is the fact that in hyperlocal organizing, it's very important to acknowledge the environment. And here in Florida, we are very fortunate where we have 64 different recognized habitats in this state. And it's a tremendous array of biodiversity. We're a very flat place, so in just a simple elevation change of a few feet, you have an entirely different soil type, an entirely different mix of native plants, and in turn, and unfortunately, an entirely different mix of often invasive exotic plants. So this is the basis of our community, or of our environmental community, right? Our lowest trophic level of primary production. So it's a really important thing to take this into consideration in the kinds of solutions that you're trying to drive in your community. Acknowledge the types of environments that are there and decide whether your goal is to restore it to a natural setting with a natural biodiversity level, or if your goal is to utilize that action project, maybe a community garden, for instance, or a native habitat planting or a wetland planting, that you're going to increase the biodiversity levels to a unnatural level as a way of compensating for the other environmental destruction in the area. So for instance, if you walk through a natural prairie or meadow, you're greeted with a few dozen species spread out across a large geographic area. But if you're building a pocket garden for migratory birds in your community, maybe on some wasted space in a Walmart parking lot, you've worked with the management of Walmart to give you one of those little areas encased in concrete and to turn that into maybe all native plants that have a high habitat value, you're going to be putting in a much denser and the normal concentration of these plants. And it's important to just acknowledge that, to have your kind of, ducks in a row, for lack of a better term, of exactly how you want to go about planning that. So always take the environment into consideration. When we do hyperlocal projects, we look at what are the native creatures that are there. We make absolute sure to never be introducing any invasive exotic anything. We've done some fish farming programs in Africa, particularly in Lake Victoria, in Uganda, for a population that was struggling with food insecurity. And one of the things that we really emphasized was that they have to aquaculture with native fish and use non-lethal means of hippo prevention and things like that. So very important to keep in mind. The fourth aspect of hyperlocal organizing that I want to bring into the sphere here is the importance of the triple bottom line, and particularly the economic aspect of the triple bottom line. Very often as a charity and as do-gooders in the world, we look at the social impact and the environmental impact as being the most important. And they certainly are top of our mind. That's usually what drives us to do a lot of this work. But in the triple bottom line mentality, the economic aspect is also extraordinarily important. And this is really true because if you look at the staying power of many different initiatives, if they have a revenue model to them in some form, then they're far more stable and under much less threat of having those impacts eroded throughout time. So to look at the social entrepreneurship model and seeing if that is something that can be built into your hyperlocal actionable programs, and if that social entrepreneurship model can also help to address and solve some of the problems for the populations that you're serving. The work that we do at Ideas for Us, we are looking to help people heal the planet and grow prosperity in communities. And I'm happy to say that through a lot of our farming initiatives, we've been able to provide real jobs that pay a living wage to people. So much, in fact, that we now have a staff of 13, and the majority of those are indeed urban farmers. We're the first organization in Orlando's history to ever hire an urban farmer as well. So the reason for that is because in our farming programs, we made sure to look at what are revenue models that take into consideration the triple bottom line as being a non-negotiable, meaning that if we're doing something and it doesn't have a positive environmental, social, and economic impact, we're not going to do it. And when you look at conservation as a whole, again, as an example, and you look at why someone is looking down that barrel and shooting an elephant or a rhino across the African continent, one of the problems with that is, you find that there are no jobs available for that person in their community. Very often, they're not the one who's making the $1 million off of selling the rhino horn or elephant tusks internationally. They're just a cog in the wheel of the global wildlife trafficking enterprise, and which, of course, is an illegal operation. So it's important to realize that that person has usually had a traumatic past with conflict or have been a child soldier, and these are the only options that are available to them: human smuggling, gun smuggling, drug smuggling, wildlife smuggling. And if you have communities that don't have thriving economic systems built around solving environmental problems and solving social issues, then you have people that will exploit that and make their own opportunities, usually nefarious ones. Next, I'd like to just go into a little bit of this process that we utilize. And I invite all of you in your hyperlocal action to really focus in on what is your process? How do you approach these problems in your community in bringing together the aspects of place, of the people that you're including, your respect, reverence, and acknowledgement of the planet and its ecosystems, how to bring in elements of prosperity to that and revenue models, and to think about that process as something that you're studying. In Ideas for Us, we've been doing this work for 11 years, and we are nowhere near done yet. We are always looking to improve our process and using science as a way to do that. So our metrics and our key performance indicators are things that are very, very important to us. So I'm going to jump into some slides right now, and that will give you a little bit more of a concept of our process. So bear with me just one moment. Okay, I believe you all can see this. So I'd like to just bring up what are the Sustainable Development Goals. And you may have heard of these, but these are global goals that have been created by over 190 different countries on the planet, initially being announced as a concept that we wanted to ideate around in 2012, and eventually becoming ratified at the Paris Climate Accord in 2015. These are probably familiar to many of you, but for those of you that they aren't, look at these wonderful 17 goals. These were created by member states of the United Nations, so not just the countries, but also academic institutions, businesses, colleges and universities are academic institutions, but also nonprofits that work within these countries as well around the world, or NGOs as they're internationally called. And the idea behind this is that we have a deadline of 2030 and needing to be able to advance a lot of this agenda by 2030, or we're going to reach a tipping point of no return. And the grim reality of how bad that tipping point is certainly something that needs to be avoided and mitigated at all costs. But one of the things that I want to point out here is that with so many of us today already blurring the lines between social and economic justice, look at how wonderful it is to see this integration of social, environmental, and economic justice together in this particular goal set. So very, very important here, from looking at fighting poverty all the way through to partnerships for the goals. Very, very important. Each one of these unfolds into its own targets and indicators. And in our process, we utilize those targets and indicators that come from the Sustainable Development Goals to build into our impact metrics that we use for our projects. And again, here's a little bit of a visualization of this key aspect of what sustainability is, of sustainability being people, the planet, and we don't necessarily like to say profit, we say prosperity, because prosperity essentially means a thriving ecosystem that includes the economy and many other factors as well. I think profit pigeonholes people into thinking of just the economic impact. So very important here. And of course, I'd also like to just say that resilience is very, very important as well. I often like to say sustainability is the first step, right? If I was in an accident and everyone says, my goodness, how is he? Is he all right? And they say, well, he's stable, right? To me, that's the bare minimum that you want to be. That's kind of how I think about sustainability. What we really want is resilience. And resilience is the ability to bounce back from tremendous problem that has occurred, whether it's an economic or environmental disaster, war or whatnot in a community, an economic downturn. This is where resilience is so important. I'm going to slice through a couple of these, just kind of depicting all of the varying studies that have gone into why the Sustainable Development Goals are important for people. You can see one of the first thing here is the opportunity to align core business activities or innovation efforts with society's needs. I think that's very, very important. But let me just scoot along here just a bit. Again, here is a quick look at our mission and some of the varying areas. Again, 5 areas that we focus on in our action projects: energy, water, food, waste, and ecology. Very important. Here's a little bit of our history of our emergence from the University of Central Florida in 2008, all the way through to the creation of some of our major programs like the Hive, Fleet Farming, and the Solutions Fund, moving into 2018 and 19. So again, we see ourselves as an environmental solutions incubator, again, focusing at that hyperlocal level of one campus, one front lawn, one block, one business, one household, and studying that impact at that hyperlocal level, and then seeing how it can be further improved, measured, and eventually scaled around. So these are important aspects of our process, and you can see some pictures of what that looks like down below. Our Hive meeting is something that we have been able to create as a think and do tank. We bring this into communities around the world. If you're interested in hosting one or having us host one, please reach out. I'll certainly share my contact information right after the Q&A session coming up. But thinking about the aspects of what it takes to create these changes, it's not just throwing people into a room together. We utilize an education component, that's just part of it. We utilize human-centered design thinking, which is just part of it. We utilize a solution showcase of individuals standing up in front of the room and talking about their ideas, ideating off of one another, and creating that kind of safe space for people to contribute and communicate. And then we do activities in the community. We'll bring people out for action projects. We'll take them on community field trips. We'll engage with students on STEM-related projects on their campuses and outside of them. We'll hold varying types of corporate cleanups to get businesses involved in that particular topic of that month. And of course, show some environmental movies along the way, and further educate the public with a panel of experts after the movie to talk about that topic, sometimes even the directors. So that operating in the community month after month after month creates the environment where innovation is very, very easy to push forward. So important stuff there. Ultimately, we saw that there are many people around the world, hopefully some of you that are watching this as well, that are interested in using the ideas methodology for an existing idea that you already have. And we want to be able to help make that possible. So we created the Solutions Fund. And this is something that we open a couple times a year. Ultimately, we're working our way up to opening quarterly and being able to provide microgrant funding for existing projects, especially projects that are within their pilot phase internationally. You can see some examples of varying things that we've done here. Latrine construction for climate refugees, building tree nurseries that have a profit model built in to reinvest into the program so it functions perpetually, especially targeting areas that are at threat for mudslides from deforestation due to cattle ranching and things like that, all the way through to aquatic plantings and things like that that beautify retention ponds and protect groundwater and help our springs, especially here in Florida, to thrive better. So very, very important types of projects. We provide that pilot funding, we mentor the people that are carrying out the project, and then look at the results to see how it can further be scaled for a greater impact. Very important. And here you can see a little bit about that scaling concept. And here's some wonderful things that we have had success scaling. So fleet farming, of course, is something that has gone very well for us here in Orlando, expanding to many different places. We went viral in 2016 with the concept on Vox and Vice and Now This and Upworthy and the Today Show and NBC Nightly News and The Guardian and all of these things. But ultimately, it was the community here at a hyperlocal level coming together and deciding that they wanted to grow food instead of lawns. And I think that that's something that many of you can get behind. Another important thing about scaling solutions is using the existing network of networks that exist out there to glean best practices from, but to also share and to give it back. So Ideas for Us, we're part of the United Nations, and we very much so look to bring other young people with us up to these meetings at the UN General Assembly in New York to have our voices heard on the global stage. Ideas for Us really prides ourselves on being a millennial-led organization. Though we have a lot of elder wisdom on our board and our advisory board, our core team is millennial, and our interns are made up of a bulk of Gen Z as well. So we're very proud of that aspect in trying to advance the 21st century in a sustainable way. We also have an exchange program for international students where we bring them to Orlando from August to December. They spend 4 months here through the U.S. Department of State program, and that helps us to further skill share around hyperlocal action to be able to scale these projects and programs further around the world. Very, very important stuff. There's a great video about some of our local action. I'm just going to cut and paste the link here, and I will now minimize this and come back. I'm going to share that in our chat. And if you're all interested in checking out that YouTube video about some of our local work through the Hive, you can check that out. It is now posted into the chat. So thank you very much. That was a little bit about how to look at hyperlocal action. Again, let me recap things. You want to first decide on the scope of the place and where you want to hold the action project and where you're going to organize for the action project. That's very important. Second, you want to determine who are the people that are most important to bring into the equation. Students, teachers, business owners, and most importantly, the people that are looking to benefit from your particular action project. Who is that audience? Even though we are doing things for the environment, it's important to have that human element there. So if you're planting wetlands to improve water quality, who in your community is water quality most important to? Well, maybe it's outdoor enthusiasts like sportsmen, fishing and water skiing and scuba diving. Maybe it's families that are caring about their children and the quality of life that they're going to have. So you really want to figure out who that target audience is and make sure that they're there. Third thing, the planet and our ecosystems. Having respect, reverence, and consideration for the impact that you're having there. Please don't spread around invasive species. please make sure that you're creating and fortifying native habitats, and that those are really important things. Of course, the next thing of prosperity and exploring if there's revenue models that you can build into your programs in hyperlocal action so that you can have staying power in the community, just like a business does. Very, very important, even though you're mission-led. And of course, the last aspect, study your process and use the scientific method. Put on your science hat and lead the way with truth and with reality and self-criticism so that you can have a constructive approach to making your projects better and better and better each time. So thank you so much. It's been a real honor to share with you a little bit about ideas for us and how we think about hyperlocal organizing. I'm Clayton Ferrara. I'm the executive director and a biologist, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Clayton. I found that to be a very interesting presentation. We do have some questions already queued up. And the first one comes from Mark Judiment. He asks, was the viral spread of information about fleet farming something that was the result of an intentional strategy?
I wish I could say yes, because then it would be replicable. But there are a lot of lessons that we learned from that, and I'll share some of those. So the way that we were able to virally spread fleet farming was by first doing the work and not seeking the media attention first. We were just out there getting stuff done. Slowly but surely, through our social media posts of being like, look what we did today, local newspapers started to come around and write a little bit about it. From those local newspapers, word then spread to the local NPR station, which then quickly snowballed to the national NPR station, which then quickly snowballed to other national syndicated media and radio and blogging and all of those kinds of things. So, you know, this is the internet. There's really no way to predict or control. They say start with the work and figure out who in your sphere of media influence can help you to get coverage where you can kind of climb up the ladder to go from that hyper-local news coverage up to national and ultimately international. And of course, with the
Okay, fantastic. And just a reminder for everyone else, we have a couple more questions in the queue, but please feel free to type into the Q&A module that should be in the main Zoom toolbar and ask your own questions for Clayton. Jack Strasberg asks, how do you reconcile the one front yard at a time and scaling with the need to have something of massive scale in place by 2030?
Yes, so this is very important in the aspect of no one person and no one organization can do this work on their own. So we are seeking partners all over the place to take the varying solutions that we've created and to reinvent them in their own way, contribute to them, scale them, and whatnot. We're looking at right now investigating what is the best way to scale fleet farming. However, the aspect of converting a lawn into a garden or into a native habitat is something that anyone can take on. There are a few different elements to fleet farming that make it unique, and fleet farming, from the bicycles to the farmers market to the intern programs to the restaurants and the role that they play, to the communities here that are food insecure and the providing of food to those communities for SNAP and EBT benefits and things like that. So that's much more of a difficult lift that we're investigating how to package up better now. But the concept, when you find a concept that works and achieves some of your goals, you've got to run with it. And anyone who's interested in looking at these kinds of things, please reach out. I am very excited to see the interpretation and reinterpretation of this across many different organizations that want to grow food and not lawns and rewild their communities.
Great. We had a question pretty early on in your presentation that was typed into the chat by Andrea Munoz, and it's asking about permaculture zones being applied to the concept of taking action.
Yeah, I mean, you can theme it however you want. You know, I love permaculture. I love deep ecology, you know, especially as a biologist, right? Thinking about different kinds of action in different kinds of soil types, right? If that's your thing, do it. You know, again, I think that a very important element here is building a sense of place and a respect for that place in the mind of the general public. And that if you can make someone excited about a unique habitat on a hillside in California where their suburban development backs up to, and they celebrate that unique mix of plants and animals and soils, fantastic. That can be the framework of your hyperlocal action. For other people, it'll be their campus because they love their college. For others, it'll be their apartment building or their work office that they go to every day. How you think about the barriers of the hyperlocal is up to your interpretation, but there has to be barriers there because that's how you measure your impact and are then able to scale it outside the confines of those barriers.
Great. All right. This is becoming a really great discussion. Keep those questions coming. We have another one here that's asked, it appears that there's quite a bit of overlap, at least in intent, with the transition movement. I'm thinking of the focus on community, action groups, movie nights, etc. Are you familiar with transition? And if so, do you have any recommendations on how to make it more effective?
Yeah, so of course, I'm certainly familiar with transition. There's definitely overlaps because there's overlaps in what works. If you're someone who's maybe suffering from a fever, right, or a flu, there's a set list of things that you need to do to get better. Hydrate yourself. Remove yourself from being around others that are infected. Take medicine if that's the particular thing that you're facing. Well, in forward where we are not only living within the parameters of being a species on this planet, but also elevating humanity to a level that we've never been able to thrive that much before. Many people think that sustainability is, you know, the kind of slap on the wrist and saying, no, you can't drive that car, fly to that country, or eat that sandwich. Right? But I truly believe that all of those things are possible with technological innovations and with a rethinking of how we are able to create resources and distribute them in our societies and communities in a more ecologically agreeable way. So in that light, of course, we're going to have to rebuild community. Of course, we're going to have to strengthen our institutions and bring people together in a constructive way where they're feeling empowered. Having a strong democratic element to it as well. Relying on science and those types of things. There's many aspects in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the 7 hallmarks of wellness and well-being, physical, environmental, social, right, and so on, that overlap in this system. You know, again, for us as ideas, we define sustainability as people, planet, and prosperity. So helping people healing the planet and growing prosperity in communities. So naturally, there's a lot of overlap. To strike at the last point of the question of what are some ways that it can be better, Well, I think that the ways that it can be better is to, of course, share more about best practices. And I think everyone needs to approach this work with an open mind and an open heart to continuously improve. And again, just because we've been doing this work for 11 years and have a lot of success under our belt, that doesn't mean that if someone were to show me tomorrow a better way that's scientifically proven to achieve these results, I would pivot and would embrace that as something else. There's also many projects that we've done that we've incorporated kind of like a decorator crab, little elements of different other projects to bring into the fold. Maybe it's the inclusion of art. Maybe it's the inclusion of music. Maybe it's creating festivals for particular groups or demographics that celebrate their culture or their country, right, for international audiences. But then also using that event as a way to frame them taking environmental action either at home or in their own community, right? So there's many different ways to build off of this, and it just comes from snowballing the sharing of best practices.
Yeah, I love that emphasis on gleaning the best practices and helping to replicate them. That is a lot of what we do here with Transition US as well, spreading these hyperlocal solutions. We have another question. Could you share how you developed funding for your projects?
Of course I can. So we are always working on developing 8 revenue models for our organization. These range from the traditional grants and foundations and, banging on the tin cup, for people to donate to these particular projects. We have funds that come from individuals. We hold fundraisers as well in the community around particular projects. We also look to businesses and directly engage with businesses where they're either impacted by the work that we're doing, or they're utilizing resources that are, environmental, which is basically every business. So we'll reach out to the businesses directly. We've also been pioneering in, again, the 4th point that I brought up of this prosperity business model aspect of looking at what are some revenue models, right? So in the case of fleet farming, some of our revenue comes from the sale of produce hyperlocally, so that the produce that's grown in people's front lawns is shared with the homeowner. The rest of it is harvested and brought to local farmers markets. Sometimes at those farmers markets, the food is virtually given away for SNAP and EBT benefits. In other farmers markets, it's sold at a very affordable price for local produce. In other settings, it's sold as a high-end luxury item for high-end luxury restaurants that can afford to purchase that produce, but all of the revenue is reinvested into the program philanthropically to be able to create more farms and to keep our farmers employed doing this work. Because having a job, as many of you know, is extraordinarily important to functioning in society. So I think that it's important for organizations to look at, yes, I'm a nonprofit, yes, I'm led by my mission, but what from the for-profit world, where capital flows so freely, can we borrow those best practices and incorporate into the work that we're doing to move forward?
Great. Thanks so much. So the questions keep flowing in.
It's better than the opposite.
Yeah, it is great. It's great. Thank you all for your really good questions. So this one asks, there's been some attempts to form transition groups at universities, and while there's often been quite a bit of interest, maintaining continuity when students graduate has been difficult. How do you do it?
Yeah, it's very hard. And in fact, it's something that we have seen as an unavoidable problem. And once you accept that there are certain issues that are inherent parts of the anatomy, if you will, of an issue that are unavoidable, you start to look at the other ways to go about addressing the problem. So We know that in universities, every 4 to, I think the national average is 6 years now that it takes for a student to, on average, get out of college, but let's just say 4, that on average you're having 100% turnover every 4 years of your best leaders, right? How do you handle that? Plus, students are busy, and not every sequential year of students do you have a rock star leader. So what we chose to do is focus on the solution that's being created, the action project, and not the presence at the college or university. So if action projects in the community have created a great bike share program, instead of building another parking garage on campus, or if students have organized and been able to achieve off-campus recycling at off-campus dormitories, right? Or no more single-use plastic or styrofoam in their dining hall, or more vegan options, or whatever it may be, right? We'll focus on that and seeing that that solution continues and is improved throughout time, as opposed to the presence of just some students on campus and what are they doing. Focusing on the solution was a really big shift that we made as an organization. But let me just say, it's also very important to understand the intellectual capital and wisdom and source of volunteers that exist on a college campus. It really is a unique place to glean all of those resources, whether it's the brilliance of professors, the willingness of students and their bravery as young people to try to save the world and make a good impact. Don't let that slip the wayside. So it's kind of a balancing act between the two. And if you have a year where not a whole lot happens on campus, that's okay. Just keep going. Focus on those solutions and be persistent.
Great. We have a question here from Laura Madden. I think you partially answered this before, but there may be some more information that you could provide in this. About government leaders who supported and allowed fleet farming to be launched on the scale that it was. You mentioned that government ordinances needed to be created. What were those, and did this relate to safety concerns?
Yeah, so there's a lot of that, right? We're very fortunate that here in Florida and in our community, fleet farming emerged at a key time, right? There's if you look at studies, and in fact, I'm trying to remember what the exact study was called, but I believe there's a TED Talk about this. It looks at what are the key factors that make businesses succeed or fail. And in the analysis that was done by some Harvard PhDs of looking at all of these different metrics, the number one thing that led to success of initiatives was their timing. And that it doesn't matter the team, the funding, the participants in it, it's the timing of things. And we were lucky with fleet farming in the fact that in a couple of years previous to us launching this in 2014, there had been some high-profile events in our community where people had rewilded their lawn and refused to cut it, to where they then garnered hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines, some of them being fined $1,000 a day for them to cut their lawn. And what this did was it gave enough heat on the elected officials from the general public thinking about these issues that a ordinance was passed to essentially allow 60% of your front lawn to be edible landscaping and unlimited side and back lawn able to be edible landscaping. In Florida, we also have an aspect where native plants and the ability of a homeowner to plant native plants supersedes any homeowners association law in the entire state. So if you are facing some issues in your community where you can't farm your back lawn, side lawn, or front lawn, What I recommend is, first of all, learning the laws that are there in your community, why they exist and when they were created and turned into law. I would then organize local citizens to sign petitions or to create an umbrella group, like a coalition of many different organizations or businesses and homeowners, and bring those documents to your elected officials, especially your city or county commissioners, and to start organizing to have an ordinance in play. I'm happy to provide you with copies of the ordinances that are passed that allow 60% of our front lawns and unlimited back and side lawns to be farmed. So also, once you have other cities that have allowed this and they see that the world didn't end, right? It's much easier to take that and bring it to your city as proof of concept. So that is about the snowballing, right, of these solution sharing aspects at the hyperlocal level.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, Clayton. I also live in Florida and have been tracking this a little bit. And there was a Senate Bill 82 in the Florida legislature that just passed a couple weeks ago, prohibiting any county or municipality within the state from regulating vegetable gardens on residential properties. Yeah, it's nice to see some positive policies.
It's rare.
It is pretty rare.
It's rare, especially in Florida. And I think that one of the key aspects of our freedom is our ability to grow food. And human ancestors have been farming for about 13,000 years. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I think that that's an important aspect that we take a look at as well. Of course, as long as it's organic and pesticide free.
Yeah. All right, we have 3 more questions in the queue. Let's see if we can get through at least these. They're all really good. So somebody says the transition group that I've been involved with has demographics that largely skew to older and retired people who have time. Do you have any strategies for making an organization work for millennials and Generation Z?
Great question.
Outside of the universities as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great question. 2 things are key to that. Number 1, make whatever you're doing fun. People won't come back if they're not having fun. So most people, and now I do, but I also realize that I'm an academic and I like weird stuff. So if the topic is interesting and you put me in a room and someone's going to talk at me for 4 hours about something I'm interested in, I have no problem and the attention span to be able to handle that. But most people do not. So to have a meeting that's just got a lecture at the front of the room talking at you and then everybody goes home and there's no food and there's no snacks and there's no things to drink and it's all full of plastic waste and styrofoam, people aren't going to take you seriously and they're not going to come back. I wouldn't come back. Right? So you've got to make things fun and you've got to own the sphere that you're in. So when we have our Hive meetings, for instance, they're interactive, there's multiple speakers, there's whiteboards and breakouts and human-centered design activities. All of them are catered. We reach out to local restaurants and food companies that provide food for 100 attendees from the general public to be able to feed them because we know that we have it in the evening. We know people are going to be hungry. And if you don't have the budget or the connections to do that, that's fine. But tell people that every meeting is a potluck, right? And make a plate of brownies and show up and give them out to people. Cut them real small if you have to, whatever you have to do, because these things are so important. So first, make it fun. Second thing is go where young people are. We love to do an event called Drink Beer Talk Climate. And it's basically a forum that we do at bars. And we'll show up, pop out our PA system, get on the mic, and try to politely engage with climate deniers over drinks and also talk to the general public about the reality of climate change. It's very rare that people are around experts in climate change to ask all of their questions to, from them watching the news. And here we are showing up at a bar. We meet so many young people that are dying to do something in the community. And give them cards and send them to our Facebook events and all of these kinds of things. And they show up for meetings. And then they're greeted with more fun activities and a great community. This is how we've been able to hold our Hive meeting here in Orlando for 75 months in a row, since February of 2013, without ever missing a single month. It's not that we're geniuses and special. It's that we make things fun and relevant and bring them to where young people are.
Awesome. Yeah. Two more questions here. Can the projects in your portfolio, like the solar training project, be funded and replicated in other communities using local solar providers and an entrepreneurship network?
Targeted question there. Yes. So, one of the things that we've really realized is, again, in this ecosystem of innovation and this virtuous cycle that we try to create in communities, is that businesses play a very important role. And when we look at businesses that are most important to see thrive and survive, few are as important as those on the forefront of renewable energy. And in Florida, we have a problem where there are not enough qualified people who are being hired for solar companies. Many of them are being brought from other states like Colorado or California, even Washington, D.C., and are being brought into the workforce. Well, I think that that's wonderful, but I also care about local jobs and localism, and for people that have grown up in a community to find a job here so that we don't have a brain drain and they just leave and go off somewhere else after being educated here and growing up, and then they're not part of our community anymore. I don't think that's good. So finding ways to partner with companies, and again, to focus on the model. It's not so important of who that company specifically is, but what is the model that you're able to utilize? What's the positive impact that that's having from its outcomes and outputs? And how are you really affecting lives? So in the case of solar training programs that we've done before with our wonderful partner ESA Solar here in Orlando, right? That concept is something that can travel to other states where the solar market is facing similar problems of finding qualified workforce. There's no shortage of people that need jobs. Solar jobs are very well paying, even at the entry level. And there's a lot of opportunities for veterans, for kids that aren't college bound, and for people who are looking to shift out of their current job, whatever that may be, and wanting to get into the third industrial revolution, as it's called. So really important stuff there. So if you're a solar company and you want to partner with us, please reach out.
Great. All right, so one more question here. This is something I was wondering a little bit about as well. Sorry about that. Got a call. I live in a pretty conservative area of the country, and I'm interested if you've had any pushback on being so closely associated with the United Nations. There are still folks around here who are concerned about the infamous Agenda 21.
Yes, of course. So that's a really great question. Who knew that in a United States creation like the United Nations would become so vilified after time, right? There are people who legitimately think of it as the New World Order, which is a bummer. Let me say this, whether it's the UN, whether it's your affiliation with anything or anyone, it is very important that you find the balance between being true and honest to yourself and who you are and what you stand for, and playing to your audience. It is not an either or, it is a how can you do both. So there are many times where we'll be speaking with very conservative business owners, for instance. And is it so important that I mention that we're affiliated with the UN? Not necessarily. Sometimes it will be just a passing comment instead of the entree, which can be very important for companies that are global, do global work, and are interested in global trade policy, right? They love that we're part of the UN and want to work with us even more because of that. But it doesn't jive with everybody. So does that mean that I would ever deny it or omit it or say that we're not part of it? Of course not. If someone truly doesn't want to work with us because of who we are affiliated with, that's their decision. And, more power to them there. So again, the first point, you've got to be true to yourself. Mm-hmm. But you also have to play to your audience. If there's one thing you can maybe take away from this webinar, besides how to hyper-locally organize, it's that if you're in the nonprofit field, you're actually in sales. And you are in sales for the purpose of pitching your solution for these global problems to people for either their time, talent, or treasure. And you've got to get really good at delivering that message. You've got to have the science to back it up and to prove that if they go with you and your approach, that they're gonna win. This is just as important as someone trying to give you $1 million check or 5 hours of their time as a volunteer after work when they're tapped out and busy and they're looking for something to attach their heart and their efforts to. So these are important things to consider, but I would say it's not either or, it's both. Play to your audience, be true to yourself, and that will never lead you astray.
Awesome. So as we begin to wrap up, I'd like to give you an opportunity, maybe about 5 minutes or so, to do any closing comments, and in case it's helpful, some of the other thing. One of the other things that I had in mind was I met Chris Castro out in California late last year at the Global Climate Action Summit, and was really excited to hear about all the great things that are happening with the city of Orlando, and wondering about the connection between Ideas for Us and your local municipality. We currently have an international project going on called Municipalities in Transition, and a lot more transition initiatives are looking at how they can work with their local governments.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's so important. Chris Castro is a real hero of sustainability for Orlando. He is the director of sustainability for the city, a millennial as well. He was the youngest sustainability director in the country for quite a while, and then was beaten by a gentleman named John R. Seidel, who's now the sustainability director of Atlanta, even younger than Chris. So I say that because these are glimmers of hope that our sustainability-minded generation is getting leadership executive positions in cities to push their sustainability programs forward. So double thumbs up there. Municipalities are so important. I mean, this is the city. This is where the rubber meets the road. They're the people who control the ordinances. They control the enforcement of everything from law to whether or not you're going to get fined for your garden. So don't see them as enemies. If you are living in a city where you think your elected officials are a bunch of jerks, run for office and take over. That's absolutely what you need to do relentlessly, and get everyone else that who's qualified to run for office too. That's the way that you create change, but you have to have them meaning the city itself, the municipality, as an ally, right? We're citizens. They're here to serve us. Right? There's no reason why you should be at odds with your city. You can be at odds with individuals within your city, but ultimately they're your ally and they're there to help you. We're very fortunate that here in Orlando, we absolutely have allies in the city, and not just Chris, but our mayor as well is a climate mayor, and very much so focused on creating Orlando as a very sustainable place, if not the most sustainable place in the country. So we're trying to figure out how to best to do that. And again, this is where Ideas for Us comes in as a entity, a nonprofit that works with businesses, municipalities, institutions, and universities, and other nonprofits, because we want to take that, bundle it all up, and share it with other cities. So we're very excited to scale our core programs like the Hive and the Solutions Fund to other cities around the country. And if you're interested, I'm happy to talk to you about that. But let me just jump onto my soapbox real quick for my final parting words for everybody. And, you know, this is not easy, this sustainable development work, but we absolutely have to continue it. I can't think of anything more important that I would want to give my life to. This is why I get out of bed every single day and take so long to get back into bed. We have to do this work. Don't be discouraged by the setbacks. We will eventually prevail. This is about quality of life. This is about improving the quality of life for future generations, not just of Americans, but people globally. We have to do it through hyperlocal action. In fact, that's the only way to do it. And then to take those best practices and scale them bigger and bigger and bigger by bringing them to other hyperlocal places around the world. So that's very important. We need you, and we need your help. If you are a business owner of any kind, please reach out to us. We're always looking to add businesses to our business membership as Ideas for Us. We have a very robust corporate social responsibility department. We write blogs about businesses and put you on blast through our podcast that we're going to have launching here very soon. So there's a lot of resources and opportunities that we can share with you if you're a business and get your brand out there as an environmental advocate. The next thing is that also for individuals, we have a membership for Ideas for Us as well. All of these things can be accessed through our website. So visit us at ideasforus.org. You can also learn more about our fleet farming program through fleetfarming.org. You can follow us on social media at Ideas for Us, and you'll see that many of our presence around the world in different countries also have their own social media channels that are maybe focused on environmental issues in just Liberia or just Nepal or just Uganda and so on. So thank you so much. Please consider being a business member, being an individual member, donating to us, but most importantly, do your part, get active, and advance sustainability in your community. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I just want to recommend to everyone, if you haven't seen the National Geographic documentary film, Paris to Pittsburgh, it's an excellent, inspiring film featuring Ideas for Us. So you can see more of their work there as well. Yeah, thank you for being with us today, Clayton. Thank you for all the great work that you do. We hope to stay in touch. And yeah, a few people have already been expressing their thanks in the chat.
That's great.
Yep, so you can see that. And everybody feel free to add any feedback or thank yous to Clayton. Yeah, I want to let you know that I will be sending you all an email either later today or tomorrow with a link to the recording of this so that you can share it out to all your friends that you think might be interested. We also have a short survey about our webinar series, what you would like to see, so we can continue to improve it and make it more as useful for you as possible. So please look out for that. And yeah, again, thank you very much, Clayton. Thanks everybody for being here. And
thank you, Don. Thank you to the attendees. Thank you to my team and board. We appreciate everything. So have a wonderful rest of your day.